Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. That very much Truman Show kind of closing comment. And can I thank you all for taking the time to come and listen to the webinar today. So what we're going to talk about today is the four main tenets, really, of a vulnerability management program. And they are based around the design of the vulnerability management program, understanding the risks that you have that kind of affect how far and how deep you go with the vulnerability management program. And then the second part of it is kind of developing the goals that you have and making sure you get the right technology in place and to kind of meet your threats and kind of develop those technical specifications. And then once you've got the kind of steps 1 and 2 in place, then we kind of sort out the deployment of it. How do we make sure that you deploy the tools that you've got, making sure they're effective, and making sure you kind of put them into kind of life cycles and understanding your assets. And really the final part of it is the operational side of it, is making sure you kind of build it into BAU. And once you've got rid of all the highs and the criticals, you start really addressing the mediums and the lows. So we kind of try to put a very complex kind of a set of security operations into kind of 4 main steps. And so hopefully you enjoy this webinar and understand how we can help you to deliver your vulnerability management program. So we'll move on to the next slide, please. So the key thing here is the design. It's assess the current security posture and the organizational restrictions, the tools and methods that are used for the risk assessment, identifying critical assets, and kind of clarifying the scope that's around it. So let's move on to the next slide. So what are we looking at in terms of the vulnerability landscape here? The key thing is the kind of what we call the kind of GRC bit, is what's your governance, risk and compliance status. Is at the end of the day, if you're a financial services organization, you're going to have a lot more of the kind of vulnerability management requirements that are set out by things like ISO 27001, PCI, NYDFS, all the lovely letters and numbers that make up the make up the kind of compliance world. Also, it's kind of understanding where your assets are, and this is the kind of crucial part that you see a lot at the beginning of the CSF. It's the identification and protection of your assets. The really key thing here is to understand what have you got. Have you got everything in the cloud? Have you got a production process? Are you all just full of laptops and mobile phones? And to really understand, what it is that you've got in terms of your asset set. And a lot of the things why vulnerability management doesn't work, it's because not having a full understanding of your assets. So I did a recent LinkedIn post actually one of the things that why is asset management so important to security? Well, unless you know what you're protecting, you can't have a full scope of your security operations and things like that. And then also the other side of it is understanding what the threat is. I don't need to, it's kind of common knowledge that an opportunity nation state, something like Russia or China, they see every day, you see lots of kind of attacks that are happening, but also you get people from organized crime, because cybercrime pays. There's a lot of stuff inside the money thing, but also you have the kind of hacktivism, kind of political activists and things as well. But also you have the insider threat as well. So it's understanding, making sure that you don't create those vulnerabilities in there as well. And that's a really kind of thing to understand, is just to kind of do a threat modeling and actually understand the threats to your organization. And my colleagues at Nettitude, we do this day in, day out. We kind of build up policy, process and procedures, understand with our penetration testing, our red teaming, and basically building up threat models and advising a lot of our clients on how the bad guys can do the crucial thing there, and that is kind of lateral movement and data exfiltration. So you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to go on and on about MITRE attacks and cyber kill chains, but the key thing is understanding your vulnerability landscape and understanding what the threats and processes are. So move on to the next slide. So what makes an exploit? So an exploit is, what are the things that are on there? So the kind of configuration of those exploits and the vulnerabilities in there. And one of the key things you get is whenever you get a vulnerability scan, so you might have an ASV scan as part of your PCI, you might have a penetration test, you might have something like a Qualys scanner or a Tenable scanner, and they will come up with vulnerabilities with a CVSS score. And those CVSS scores, the higher the number, the more dangerous they are. And really it's understanding how that can be exploited. So you get a lot of things that kind of like 0-day exploits, and they're the ones that are known before the big guys can put a remediation in there. So that's why things like bug bounties are really popular, and a lot of these big companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Apple, they have quite kind of complex programs, so that if you send them a vulnerability, what will happen is that they will pay the bad guys, well, not so much the bad guys, but pay the guys to really kind of give them the fix, so it doesn't run too badly and things like that as well. So there are lots of vulnerabilities out there, and making sure that we reduce the number of exploits as much as possible in there as well. So what we're looking to really do here is to prevent the exploit from happening, and certainly from getting worse as well in there as well. So a lot of these exploits kind of do for kind of password password exploits and stuff like that. So if we just move on quickly to the next slide, I think there was a quick preview there. So what are the kind of things that we look for in terms of like this threat intelligence sites? So obviously information security sites. There's lots of bits and pieces that come up there, vendor blogs, official disclosure, lots of stuff on Twitter, and really, if there is a vulnerability, is to kind of make sure you kind of, when you have social media searches, is to make sure you put a whole buzzwords in there as well. Code repositories on such like GitHub, they have proof of concepts of vulnerabilities from all the technical site. Pastebin and Ghostbin, they're not dark web locations, they are easily searchable. They will house a list of exploitable vulnerabilities. And then as you get more into it, you have things like the dark web, which kind of which is seen as an index web as well, with forums and things along those lines, so that they can certainly be really interesting in terms of the whole threat intelligence. And there's a whole kind of industry around this kind of thing, really to make sure that they get the right load of threat intelligence. So the key thing to build that one up is to really understand what tools you have, what systems you use, what suppliers you have, and make sure you have regular feeds from there as well. So you'll see things, classic ones like I won't name the vendors because I'll probably get into trouble. But there's some big portals out there that have that release some vulnerabilities really, and also Microsoft release notifications on there as well. And so the type of vulnerability assessments that you can certainly do is you kind of have passive and active scanning and intrusive scanning. So they're the kind of vendors like Tenable, Qualys and various other ones in there, and they will scan your network, they will scan your systems, they will scan your code environments, and they will come up with vulnerabilities. If you look on the right hand side, a lot of these companies they publish the vulnerabilities that are there. They say they're going to need to patch them. I'm sure many of you heard of like Patch Tuesday and things along those lines, but these are the people that will know who've done the vulnerabilities out there and say that you need to fix them. So let's move on to the next slide. So really it's understanding how they all kind of blend together as well in this kind of thing. So when you're looking at the kind of CVSS scores, it's really to say the measure of severity. So the base and the temporal and environmental, and they kind of range from 0 to 10. So if you go on to their website, they will give you a whole detailed technical explanation of how these risk management kind of feeds up and understanding the CVSS score. So the key thing is understanding with the CVSS score is like 8 to 10 is seen as critical, 6 to 10 is seen as high, and then obviously the further number down you get like kind of mediums and lows, for example. There is a tendency, I was saying, is that everyone fixes the criticals and highs and kind of forgets about the mediums or lows. But the key thing is making sure we have the right strategy in place so that you have a comprehensive program in place. Next slide, please. And so what we're looking at here is really when you're looking at it in a wider risk management concept, you have the kind of three kind of levels of control. So you have preventative, detective, and corrective. Preventative are all the things such as like kind of like firewalls and all that stuff, and then you have detective, which is like the tenables, the sentinel ones, the CrowdStrikes and stuff like that, and then you have the corrective controls, which tend to be the patches, updates, and vulnerabilities, and then really is to understand a risk event, and then you put those corrective and recovery in things in well. So you have your threats and vulnerabilities that on the whole raise the level of risk, and then you have your preventative and detective controls in place. You put in the corrective controls that reduces the impact of any potential cybersecurity event, but it doesn't necessarily reduce the likelihood here. So the good thing about vulnerability management thing is you're there to really kind of impact the impact levels of your threats, rather than so much of the likelihood. Now, if we apply this in a cybersecurity context, we move on to the next slide. You can see here just an example of this as well. So, one of the things that you can certainly see is, especially in the manufacturing space, that you'll have kind of Windows 2003, 2008 servers in there, bits of Windows XP. Okay, there might be slightly rudimentary examples. So preventive controls is end-of-life operating systems and user training and awareness. And then basically you can put detective controls by kind of putting VLANs and kind of putting them in containers and stuff along those lines, and making that you apply those patches to end of life. But basically what the risk event is a compromise of that. So what you want to be able to do is to kind of upgrade those systems or isolate those systems, and then be able to kind of do the recovery. So you kind of restore from backup. So what that does is reduces the impact of loss of service, financial impact, and a kind of regulatory impact. So it's really important that there is a tenuous link between having an out-of-date server, putting the preventative, detective, corrective controls in place that reduces the compromise. And so what you're looking to do is you're looking to reduce the kind of business metric impacts, which would be the loss of service, financial impact, and data loss regulatory. And that's a really important thing, especially when you're looking to do things around cybersecurity, is that you put the risk and the impact in a business context, because that is what the boards really do understand, and that is what the senior guys, the chief finance officers, the chief operations officers, the chief information technical officers, they're the things they're really worried about. The minute the businesses stop their productivity because of a cyber attack, is the minute where it really hurts. So it's really important to link vulnerabilities that you see on the left-hand side of your screen to the kind of business impacts on the right-hand side of the screen. We'll move on to the next slide, please. And so the different states of vulnerabilities that you have out there. So, a lot of things you see here, these are the ones that hit the social media, make the news, is a kind of active vulnerability making the rounds. So if you have a 0-day vulnerability, I'm sure you've heard of Heartbleed, and so some of the others that come in there, kind of are too many to mention. They're the ones that really send the urgent ones in there as well. And you also have dormant ones on there, and they're the ones that kind of tend to work on outside operating systems, and they tend to be like shut off to the wider world. And also you might have carriers on there where they can be quite dangerous, especially in a ransomware context, is that you might have pseudonymization of a vulnerability. So you might have one part of it working in a dormant state, and then it has been known for kind of adversary countries to kind of put the other half in, and then the kind of some of the two parts make a whole, and create all sorts of carnage in there as well. But the key thing is to make sure that the active ones are obviously dealt first, and then followed by the less active ones in the future. Move on to the next slide. And so step two is basically once you've designed all of these, so you understand the risk context of all there, it's kind of develop that vulnerability management program, setting these clear objectives, and then managing the vendor selection. So let's dive into the next slide and discuss that a little bit more. And so the key thing, and it's the same with any kind of IT implementation project, is making sure that you design your vulnerability management program, you kind of develop that, and making sure that you have a good set of tools in there as well, and have some standalone engagement. So have some things like pen tests, red teaming, OSINT threat assessments, do some, and then basically develop your vulnerability management program. So you're actively seeking with your partners and suppliers how you can deploy it in there as well. So once you kind of the initial production, and then make sure that you get a good measurement and kind of remediate in there as well. And so the purple boxes are really the kind of BAU elements in there, with the blue and orange boxes are very much the implementation. And then also the kind of green box in the end is where you do those kind of legacy systems and then move to the end of life environment. Next slide, please. And so how do you kind of scope the limit of coverage? And you can see on the left-hand side there's a whole list of stuff in place, and really that is what we do. What I do a lot of the times at Nettitude is kind of understand what operating systems, web applications, and all these things are in scope. And every infrastructure is going to be different, is going to have a different scope in place. And it's really key to understand how that all hangs together, because you can't cover everything, and you need to kind of protect the kind of crown jewels, and that's the kind of key aspect here, is understand what data really kind of matters to the business. So for example, if you're an e-commerce website, it's all about the usually about the kind of warehouse database systems, or the inventory, or things along those lines, or you might have the CRM or the website. If you're there will be things in the business where your systems will be absolutely kind of critical to the health of the business. To work out the kind of do the business impacts analysis, work out where your critical systems are, and then focus on building the vulnerability management around your most important systems in terms of criticality and availability in there as well. So let's move on to the next slide. So this is all about kind of deploying those continuous monitoring strategies, leveraging, and then building the life cycles in there as well. Next slide. And so, as I was saying earlier, is these are the kind of suggested things we're there. I talked about the CBSS scores, and those are the ones that, just because it's a score of 8 and above, they're going to say it's pretty serious, but it's best to put your risk assessment in there as well, because you might, for example, have a critical on a test server, but you might have a medium level severity within a server that kind of hosts your crown jewels data. So the stuff that's really, really important to your business. So, or you might have a medium level severity that kind of could have a substantial impact to your BAU. So, for example, something like like a document management system, you might have a medium level vulnerability, but you need to fix that because the loss of service if your document management system went down would be a significant impact in there as well. So one of the really key aspects in this kind of thing is, just because it's a medium level severity on a CBSS score of 6 to 8, it might be a medium level severity on a critical system, or you could have a critical severity on a low impact system as well. So usually kind of go through the steps. We recommend you look at the severity, you look at the organizational risk management, and then basically you define the risk rating in there as well. So let's move on to the next slide. And so these are the kind of things that you need to make sure that you kind of like put in place. So making sure that you have things like your vulnerability scanners that kind of run weekly, that updates your executive dashboard, and make sure you have the SLAs in place to show that your medium and highs are kind of in place, and that you have the regulatory, and you kind of put exceptions in there as well. I want to talk about the kind of three-letter acronyms. So you have technical system owners or total system owners or whatever. We just use this as a kind of internal acronym more than anything. Is that you have system, you have data, and you have application owners as well. So it's dependent on the level of business that you have in there as well. So really it's to make sure that those core systems, those system owners are responsible for those vulnerabilities, but also making sure those patches are put up in place as well. So not only do you often have kind of like Patch Tuesday, for example, that does deal with kind of patches, we also might have ones for vulnerabilities in there as well, but making sure you kind of fit that into your vulnerability management program, making sure that you're scanning for vulnerabilities and making sure that, if you may have a critical system, for example, that could be kind of, we can't turn it off and on, because if you turn it off, you turn it back on, you don't know what the state of it will be. You get a lot of that in the production area. So it's really just making sure you take a balanced risk management approach to say, okay, the stuff that you can update on an end user machine doesn't need to turn off. It's going to be a much lower risk profile than a kind of production process where the server is a bit kind of out of date and you haven't turned it off for a while. And if you turn it off during business hours, that could create a real issue. So what you need to do is make sure you have build it in with some scheduled downtime, make sure you have the backups ready so there's a system failure, and that really should fit into the executive dashboards and the SLA side of things as well. But also don't be afraid to kind of put exceptions in there as well. There's business impact, so it's really making sure that if those vulnerabilities can't be patched, is it kind of fed through the problem and the issue management side of things. Next slide, please. And then really it's this is the kind of the exceptions management in there. You may have a situation where you have false positives where the host is kind of identified as being vulnerable and it's not. And basically it could be a case of like, this is a bit of a false flag scenario where it's not really an issue. And you sometimes get that a lot with things like test servers and stuff like that. But also you may have a things where, as I was talking about before I went on to the talked about this slide, is to put some kind of acceptable risk and delayed action things in process. But really, this is where the kind of operational side of the vulnerability scanning and patching and updating and all this stuff needs to feed into the tactical side of the cyber risk management and making sure that you have those controls in place and you have a good risk management program in place so you can accept, avoid, mitigate or transfer the risk. That's the kind of ISO 27005 kind of nomenclature, but really it could be anything really in there. But as long as you document those risks, and also you could, as I said, put it into delayed action and wait till there's kind of service downtime or when the time is right in order to have that vulnerability management program. Next slide, please. And then the final bit on the bit is the kind of BAU side. And so basically making sure that it's kind of effective. So move on to the next slide. And really this is all about making sure that you kind of, as a BAU process, now you've set everything up, you understand your asset, you understand your systems, you've got it involved with your technical system owners, and really it's all about migrating it over to the business as usual. So this kind of step 4 is all about KPI metrics and really building in the things in there. So you can see the first 2 kind of KPIs is the time to detect and the time to resolve, and that's really the kind of key thing, is that using your threat intelligence out there, using your systems feeds in there. Is there a vulnerability? This, if you don't detect them in time and it leads to an exploitation, that's when the bad news happens. And the really key thing around that is making sure you have a good time to detect. Have you detected a vulnerability? Has it been into the system? Have you got eyes on it? Is it an issue? Is it an impact? And then the next bit is really making sure you get the time to resolve and mitigate. What are you going to do with this vulnerability? If you go to the don't go to the previous slide, but if you do go to the previous slide, you will see things such as false flags, kind of deployment times and the risk mitigation and stuff like that. Just making sure you have that good metric. So there is that ability to make sure that that there is that vulnerability metric. in there, so that we know which ones have been which ones have been resolved and which one are kind of being put on the side for a bit. And I suppose the average exposure, it's kind of a good one, and this is a really, really important one in terms of like highs and critical, is how long is the business exposed to these vulnerabilities. And we see this not so much in the kind of lower end of the level 1, level 2s of the capability and maturity assessments, but also on the kind of more mature environments, is what is the business risk of being exposed. And when you looked at things like Log4j, which is the one I remembered, and the Heartbleed type thing, people did not follow these kind of KPIs. They were exposed to them, and those systems were exploited. And that's really how a lot of these systems are compromised, because those vulnerabilities are published, they're not picked up, they're not resolved, they're not mitigated, and they're not implemented. And you can be lucky and wait till your annual pen test, or you can be unlucky when the hacker turns up with the bad news. So really, it's making sure you get the average exposure of those critical or high vulnerabilities down to a low level as well. And really the number of open and high vulnerabilities, and these should be risk managed. So in many ways, once you've got the first 3 in, the fourth one is the most important, is making sure that you keep those vulnerabilities patched and keep the time of those unpatched vulnerabilities in there as well. But ones that are false positives, ones that are kind of being risk accepted, is really important to kind of document there as well. So it is vulnerability management is not a project. It is a implementation exercise, and it really is an exercise that will never end. As long as your system is on and it's connected to the internet, there will be vulnerabilities, and you really got to make sure that you're on top of that at a kind of operational level, you have the tactical risk level, and also that you kind of develop that strategy so that the business understands the risk appetite and tolerances in which this is kept in there. Also, a key thing is making sure you have the scan coverage. A lot of people, they kind of go in and they kind of set everything up and they scan the same stuff. They'll implement a new system and won't scan it. So always challenge what and how and where and when you are scanning. And making sure that you make sure that those critical systems are scanned. So that's more when the kind of GRC, the kind of second level people get involved. Is that the first level are there to deal with the day-to-day vulnerabilities and responsibilities. The second one is to make sure the right thing to scan. And also with the kind of third line of defense that you're having there, is that internal audit is to really make sure that's all in place. And then kind of build up the vulnerability reopen rate, and then the average risk per asset group, and then making sure that all the assets that you might have a cloud environment, an internal environment, an end user environment, and really make sure you can report on those metrics, and that's how you can get on top of your vulnerability management program.